We're gonna make apple pie. Certainly one of my favorite desserts. Reminds me of when I was a child with my grandmother. A slice of apple pie, a little bit of whipped cream, or better yet, vanilla ice cream. It was the perfect way to end a meal. As American as apple pie, but as I've learned from my English pastry chef, the apple pie actually originated in England. So as much as that is true, I still really associate this with childhood. And it's such an important part of childhood. My grandmother had apple trees and cherry trees, and she'd make pies for us in the summer and in the fall. And they were just great, in large part because of the crust. So this is really one of the most important parts about any pie, and certainly this crust can be used with any pie recipe that you have. It's a really, really wonderful pie crust. So we have all-purpose flour. We have pastry flour, which is a finer ground flour, and this helps with keep it a little stronger. We have lard. We have sweet butter. We have vinegar, which is going to help shorten the gluten to keep it tender. Water. We have sugar. We have salt. We have a little baking powder. The baking powder is going to help make it expand without making it rise too much, or help making it rise without expanding too much. And again, the flakiness of a crust is the most important part, I think, of a pie. We're going to just work quickly here because everything needs to be cold. And that is a critical part of making a great crust, is keeping your fats cold. They don't have to be totally incorporated. In other words, if you have little pea-sized pieces of the fat, whether it's butter or lard, that's totally okay. So getting all of our dry ingredients in our mixing bowl. Get our fat in there. We'll work with our hands here. Now remember, this is hard butter and hard fat, so it's very cold, and that's what we want. Now we're going to separate this or divide this in two pieces, one for the bottom and then one for the lattice, which we're going to do on top. I love lattice on top of a pie for two reasons. I love the way it looks, but also it helps to vent the filling. We want to make sure that venting is continuous. I know you've seen where there's a small vent in top of a pie that has a solid top, where I prefer the lattice because there's more vents, more dehydration, so it keeps the crust crispier, and that's what I really want. Vinegar. Water. Just squeezing with my hands. Continue working as fast as you can, keeping it cold. Okay, I'm going to turn it out onto my tabletop. Bring it all together. Just make sure it's... And you can see those little pieces of lard or those little pieces of butter. Those are okay. Get it all off my hands. And then just bring it all together, finally, getting all the little runaway pieces. It shouldn't take you any longer than that to make this crust, okay? We'll go ahead and divide it in half. That's what I'm shaping a little differently because this will be my rectangle rolling piece for the lattice, because I want to be able to cut the lattices in strips. Okay? Then we're going to go ahead and refrigerate that for about 10 minutes. If you refrigerate it overnight, it's going to be really, really firm. You have to take it out to temper to roll it. Then you run a risk of actually emulsifying it more. So try to make it the same day. Chilling it for 10 minutes, letting it rest, bringing it out, rolling your round, rolling your rectangle, rest 10 minutes, bring it back, start to fill the base to bake with weights, and we'll show you how to do that. Okay, 10 minutes later, the pie crust is still soft. I'm going to roll it between 2 sheets of parchment paper so I don't have to add any excess flour to it. We have a round one here, which we're going to roll and try to maintain that circular shape. So that could be the bottom of our pie. In other words, fill the pie pan. And just turning it as I roll very lightly. Watching the shape, making sure that it stays round. Again, you may be able to see a little bit of fat in there, probably a little bit of lard, and that's totally fine. In fact, that's what we want. Little pea-sized pieces are okay. I'm using a rolling pin without handles. You can use one with handles. I'm used to this because again, it's a personal preference. I'm not saying you can't use a rolling pin with handles. I just have a better feel for the pressure that I'm putting on my crust or my dough. I've done a good job at maintaining this shape, nice circular shape. And then I'm just going to, without rolling, just going to press it out I can kind of feel the evenness of the thickness by doing that. In other words, I'm not hitting any ridges. And if I do hit a ridge, I'm pushing it down. So that helps me feel the evenness of that dough. Okay, there you can see what we have there. In the meantime, I'll show you the lattice. Again, so we have already a rectangle shape here. We want to be able to cut long strips for the top of our pie. And we're going to do the same thing with this. Between 2 pieces of parchment paper, now the bottom we want a little bit thicker than the lattice. It's going to support about 18 to 20 apples. Again, I keep my fingers in this position. I outstretch them, so I'm covering more of the rolling pin as I'm rolling. Okay, almost there. I'm just going to now again, put pressure just to make sure I have it even. I can feel a little ridges and bumps as I go through, holding that, pushing. Feels nice and smooth, feels nice and even. Again, it's a personal preference. Okay, I think we're there. All right. Back to the refrigerator for 10 minutes. Okay, we've rested our dough for 10 minutes. Now we're going to line our pie tin with that. We're going to use beans to weigh down, and we're going to use cling wrap instead of parchment paper, or instead of tin foil, to line after we have our dough in there. I like to use cling wrap because it's a little stronger than parchment paper. Sometimes parchment paper tears and the beans go everywhere. The foil, it actually sticks into the dough as it's baking, so you have that potential. Cling wrap is perfectly fine in the oven, and it comes out very simple, very easy, and keeps a nice smooth surface. You see how easy this is? We're just gonna lay it in there. Maybe a little bit of adjustment. And just go ahead and start to lift and let it fall. Lift and let it fall. Lift and let it fall. Just repeating that over and over again so that it gets into the corner. Very important. So lift and fall, lift and fall, lift and fall. Now we can do two things at this time. We can go ahead and cut it, or we can do a little crimp, which I like. A little crimp there. Bringing some of that dough from above, over, over, over. Try not to stretch it from here. I stretched it a little bit from the side. I want to stretch it from what my excess dough is. Finishing with that classic finger crimp that we typically see on our pies. Keep that even. It's a little soft, but that just helps us move quicker through the process. That's the challenge about working with this dough, is you don't want to get it too soft. In other words, the temperature of the room. We're going to take our knife and just run down the edge. I'm going to keep my knife going in like this and in like this, so I'm cutting the dough as I go around. You can see that. I just want to go back and just accentuate maybe where I missed. Make it a little more uniform using my thumb and my finger. Building it up just a little higher there. Okay, now we're going to let this rest in the refrigerator for another 10 minutes. So now it's nice and cold. It's been resting in our refrigerator for 10 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and line it, as I mentioned, with cling wrap. We'll double it up a little bit so it gets a little strength in the center. Go ahead and take our crust here and just slide it underneath. And kind of the same way you put your dough in, you want to get your film, your cling wrap down into the sides there by lifting up and letting it fall in. So you're not stretching it as well or not putting any pressure on the dough. Okay, when I'm happy, make sure it's all nice and tight there. I'll take my beans, and these are just dried beans, which we're going to line into our cling wrap here, and then, of course, you can use these over and over again. At some point, they will get just so toasted they kind of start falling apart, but until then, use them as many times as you can. And just make sure that there's an even layer there. And then fold your film, your cling wrap over the edge to expose the crust. And then just make sure that it's evenly pressured in there. I'm going to carry this over to our oven now. I've placed a baking stone in there, preheated the oven to 350 degrees. I'm going to put the pie right on the baking stone so that baking stone will help cook the bottom crust, which we really like to have that really as well cooked as possible. In the sense that that baking stone really helps the conductivity of that heat penetrate through the bottom of the pie tin to that crust. So you see I've got my baking stone there. Preheated my oven to 350 degrees. Just place that right in the center of that baking stone. And there we go. We're going to check that in 30 minutes, but it may take as much as 40. Okay, it's been about a little over 30 minutes. We're going to go check our crust. I like the way it looks, so I'm going to go ahead and take it out now. Those beans are hot, so I'm going to just let that sit for a couple minutes before I take them out. Okay, so I don't hurt myself. In the meantime, we're going to start our filling. We're using Granny Smith apples today. We're grating 8 to 9 apples here, and then another 8 to 9 apples that are diced. So I like to use this type of peeler because I'm able to use it partially as a knife to get in there and take the core out, like that, on both sides. As much as I like the Swiss one, this one is my preference. And I'll just go around the edge. Same thing on the other side. And then just start to peel it. Top to bottom, leaving pressure, pulling down with my thumb. We also have a vanilla bean here, which I'm going to split. We've split the vanilla bean, so exposing the seeds in there. A typical box grater. We're going to use the large edge of it. Grate all the way down to the core. Okay. And the inside. A quick cleanup here. And you see we have a lot of surface here, so it helps us cook them quicker through that cooking process, of course, through the evaporation of the moisture that are in the apples. Adjust my flame to medium-high. Gonna go ahead and add my apples. My vanilla bean split and our lemon juice. Gonna bring that up to simmer. It's gonna take about 15 minutes to cook the grated apples. The moisture or the water from the apples will help dislodge the vanilla seed from the pod. I know there's many times where we're instructed to scrape the vanilla pod, but then you get a big clump of vanilla, which is also disintegrates in the water. It's just, I prefer to let the seeds come out naturally. The Granny Smith is a tart apple, and I always associate apple pie with tartness. So when I can find a hard, crisp, tart apple, that's what I want to use. So patience, we'll let that cook for 15 minutes. We'll watch it, we'll stir it when need be, and then we'll come back. Okay, we start to look like applesauce here. See that? We're gonna now go ahead and add our diced apples to what was our grated apples. The aromas, the vanilla and apple is just so classic. You know. Now you'll start to get a lot of liquid coming out of the just added diced apple. I'm going to cook that for another 10 to 15 minutes, just until the diced apple has a very minimal amount of resistance when pierced with a knife or with a cake tester. Now we can remove our beans from our pie crust. And the plastic wrap is easier to pick up. Look at that. Evenly cooked, beautiful crust. And you can see how that stone helped cook it evenly on the bottom as around the outside. Okay, so we're ready there. I'm going to go ahead and remove my vanilla pod. And now I'm going to add my sugar. And the reason I don't add the sugar beforehand is because I don't want to have the sugar cook and begin to caramelize and take on a flavor that'll change the way my apples taste. So we'll put our sweetener in now. Of course, our different spices, our cinnamon, our ginger, and cornstarch, which may seem a little bit unusual, but the cornstarch, which is typically activated when you're cooking it in something, it'll be activated when we bake it in the oven. So when we slice it, it holds the shape very well. You'll see that when we get our apple pie finished. Okay. The aroma of the ginger, the cinnamon, the apples, just beautiful. We're gonna now take that and cool it down for 20 minutes, and then we're gonna fill our pie, make our lattice, and be able to bake it. Now we have our beautiful chilled filling. We're gonna go ahead and put that in our pie crust, our pre-baked pie crust. This is 18 apples. Just go ahead and layer that in. Okay. We have our second dough that we rolled out here. I'm going to go ahead and cut it using a serrated wheel cutter, like for ravioli. We need to cut 12 strips, about a half an inch thick. Okay. Laying those over about a half an inch apart. We'll start building our lattice, taking one, every other one, bringing it back. And then begin layering the opposite direction. The first one's always a little harder to get really positioned correctly. Okay, and then we'll just go back over, go back over, okay. Now then the opposite one, Bring that back. Bring that back. Oops, so the opposite one. And again, just continuing. And one more time, alternating each time you add another strip. And the last one. Okay, we'll go ahead and take a pair of scissors and just snip it off. Just about 1/8 of an inch beyond the edge of the crust. We're going to bake it again for 45 to 50 minutes, again at 350 degrees in our preheated oven. Just like Grandma used to make. So the crust doesn't have a lot of sugar in it, so certainly you could use it for other applications, maybe a pot pie. I think that would be great. Another classic American preparation. Just brushing it with a little bit of egg white. I want to get that so that I can sprinkle it with sugar, and the sugar will adhere to the egg white. Okay. Just some granulated sugar. In the same way that we season our food with salt, we're going to season this with sugar. That'll give it a nice caramelization, nice crispy crust, but also very shiny. There we have it. Back in the oven, preheated 350 degrees on our stone. I can't wait. Oh, right out of the oven. I can see how flaky the crust is. The aromas reminds me of Grandma. Here's your apple pie.